It's Gordon again from Man Knitted in Scotland. This is just the second of a little pair of less formal videos I've made, drawing on things that arose from the last video. I've recorded these at the same time but split them into two videos just so that you don't have to wait ages for perhaps what it was you wanted to know. I showed you the Hazel Tindall Hinnerley jumper on the last video, and lots of people were disappointed that they didn't get a really close look and any indication of what the colours were. So I'm going to look very closely now at the front of my Hinnerley jumper and show you a little bit more of the motifs and the colours. Here it is here. When you look at that from the distance, if you don't know a great deal about Fair Isle, you probably just think that there's a brown background and a beige foreground or something, and when you look at it as closely as this, you realise there are actually 7 colours of yarn used in this. Now this is knitted in Jimison and Smith. Jimison and Smith and Jimison of Shetland are the two wools I use most, and which of the two I buy from is usually dictated more by what colour I'm looking for than anything else. But they are slightly different as yarns, and I'm not technically knowledgeable enough to say what they are. But Jimison and Smith, I think, is spun more densely. It's a denser wool. You get a denser finish once your garment is knitted. It's quite full and robust. Your Jamisons of Shetland Spindrift is more lightly spun. I don't know a great deal about spinning, so I would need an expert to tell me what I mean about that. But your yarn, when it's knitted up, is a bit lighter. It's got a bit more. It's equally robust. It's equally hard wearing, but there's just a sort of lighter, less dense feeling to your knit when it's done. This is Jimison and Smith. This will, be extremely hard wearing. But here it is. There are 7 colours in this, and I'll come back to those in a moment. But there are also, I meant to tell you, there's a corrugated rib on it in 2 colours. And to do a corrugated rib, there are several ways to do it, but in this case, it's a 2x2 rib, and your 2 knit stitches are in one colour, and your 2 purl stitches are in a different colour, and the floats are carried in the back, and that makes a lovely feature to your rib. And the same with your neck ribbing and your cuffs, which I can perhaps show you. 2x2 corrugated rib in 2 colours, which is a lovely way to do it. Just adds something, as you can imagine. Now the patterns in this, I'll bring this over a little so that you can see, in the sort of margin area that goes from under the arms to the bottom, which is usually, but not always, where adjustments are made for different sizings in a pattern. This area will be bigger in a lot of cases for jumpers knitted for bigger sizes, and so this is where you get leeway to change the size of your jumper. That is in a little sort of diamond shape, just single stitches into diamonds. Then it comes across to here, and there's this lovely sort of zigzag. It's almost like piles of S's that go down, and then down the front, this is a most beautiful design. I call it cross keys. It isn't cross keys. I'm sure it's not called cross keys. They're not keys, but it's just how I think of it. And that's a lovely design that goes down there. Here's the Essy, zigzaggy, Essy, Z-y shapes again. And then these lovely little sort of squares. Can't be cubes, they're 2-dimensional, but I always think of them as cubes. Sugar lumps almost, joined diagonally by little diagonal single stitches there. One of the things I like about Hazel Tindall's design, this is the second Hazel Tindall I've talked about, because most of what I've knitted that I haven't designed with a small d myself has been Hazels because I just like them. But as for jumpers and cardigans, the lovely thing about her designs, traditionally a lot of Fair Isles are in horizontal bands of pattern. You'll have one motif for a horizontal band and so on. If you're a slightly stouter person as I am, horizontal bands can be a little unflattering. They can draw on lookers' eyes to your width. So I think the vertical panels, as opposed to horizontal, has a use aesthetically in that way. But as a knitter, it also means you're not knitting the same logo on repeat over and over again across the width of the garment. On every row, or every round, because it's knitted in the round, of course, on every round of the garment you knit, you're knitting you're contributing to every logo. So on one round of this, I would have done that row of the diamonds, of the zigzags, of the cross keys, of the zigzag, all the way across. So you're getting a little bit of variety. Now, colours. There are 7 colours in this from Jimison and Smith, 4 background colours and 3 foreground colours. If you look at this from far away, it just says brown, but there's so much more than brown going on, and that's why it becomes almost three-dimensional, the pattern. It's not that stark two-dimensional look. It almost lifts away from the background and looks as though there are different light shades hitting it. There are 4 background colours. Now, Jimison and Smith, they give you a description, but it's not an official name. They're all by code numbers, and you find when you're knitting that you tend to call them by what they make you think of. So the darkest colour in the background is this one here. Now they call that brown, but it is really quite a dark brown. I call that Bourneville. And don't ask me why, but it just reminds me of Bourneville chocolate. It's like dark chocolate colour. So that's what I call my Bourneville colour, that very dark brown that comes in for a few rows every now and then in the jumper. And that's a colour that's used in the corrugation there of the ribbing on it. That colour is actually 080, that's shade 80, and on the website their description of it is simply brown, but I call that my Bourneville colour. Then you'll see it just moves slightly to a dark browny rust. Now that's shade 122, they call that dark mixed orange. And it's a nice colour. I just tend to call that the brown or rust. It's the sort of most mid-brown of all the colours. Then that graduates to this very reddy orangey colour. Now that's code FC38, FC38. They call that orange rust mix. I call that my reindeer colour. When I was knitting that, I used to say reindeer red. It just reminds me of the colour of reindeers. And then typical little trademark of a lot of Shetland knitters, a pop of a brighter colour, just for one row every now and then, and that is 9113 dark red. I called that cherry red when I was knitting. I used to think, what's next? It's cherry red. So that little pop, now that really draws your eye in. If you stand further away from that jumper, you don't see it. You can't see there's any red in it, but you would notice the difference if it weren't there. It's funny to say that it gives it a shape because it's nothing structural, but to your eye, it adds to the sort of three-dimensional of it. So if you start from there, cherry red, brown, orange rust mix, sorry, dark mixed orange, orange rust mix, and then you're back to your dark red. That's your background colours. Your foreground colours, there are 3 foreground colours, and they are harder to see because they're much more subtle against each other. But there are 2 different colours which against those rusty colours look beige. But one of them is called, it's 1281, 1281, marled peachy orange. Doesn't look very orange because it's again such a strong orangey colour, but it is. And then the other one's 1284, light marled peach orange. So it's just two shades of the same thing. You can barely see the difference between them, but you'll see in there that one of them is perhaps a little more sort of yellowy orangey, while the other one's much more what we would just term beige. And then this pink colour, which is number 3, shade 3, pinky fawn, they describe that as. So that's your 3 background colours. There's the slightly more yellowy beige, the slightly more greyish beige, and then that very pinky beige. And that's how they work. Now, the layout of the colours. The other interesting thing about this jumper is that all the different vertical panels, the cross keys, the zigzags, the diamonds, there's a couple of vertical single lines there, the little sugar cubes as I call them, they all have a different repeat frequency. So the colour layout is designed on the cross keys here. The colours always fall in the same place. There's your dark brown where one cross keys motif ends and the next one starts, and that is the same every time. There's your cherry red, which comes in through the middle of the dark brown, but also again through the middle of the motif. The same every time. And your two beige colours form the centre part, and they're tinged with the pinker colour on the outermost parts. The same every time. However, the sugar cubes, as I call them, and the zigzags don't repeat at the same frequency as the cross keys, and don't repeat at the same frequency as each other. So the colours fall in the same place as the cross keys, which means they are much more random in both of these vertical panels. You'll see there's a cherry red exactly halfway between two rows of sugar cubes. The next time it comes in, it's running right through the middle. The next time, it's at the top edge of the sugar cubes. The next time, it's under the row. Next time, right through the middle of the cubes. It keeps moving. So that also stops it looking too uniform, too regimented. And the same with these. And that's where and once again, if you watched the previous video on the Acht hat, there is this effect again, where an area of the pattern that has quite a lot of background showing has a quite contrasting colour. That brown is much, much darker than the other two coming in there, and it makes a shape in itself in your pattern. Again, that's almost like a full frontal of a flower there. It's got an outer shape formed by the edges of the motifs, and that little bit of space gives you it's almost like looking into the flower of a pansy or a flat flower. That again is where just a few rows of a different colour, if you do it at the right point in the pattern, will create a little bonus figure, a little bonus shape in the pattern. And I think that's really marvellous. So don't look too closely, please, at the stitches in the knitting. It's not finished. This sleeve has never been finished. I've stuck it on a circular wire just to keep it from unravelling. Then you can see I've still got my stitch markers in. I always mark with tie little bits of cotton into a loop to separate the various panels of the pattern, so that if I go wrong, I know I've gone wrong. If I've lost a stitch or something, if I don't arrive at the next panel, I'm certainly not shifting them over accidentally, making them run into each other. But so this has not been washed. It hasn't been blocked or steamed or pressed or been allowed to take its shape. And we all know that proper wool, once it's blocked, your stitches all settle in. They sort of set a little, and if you've done a nice tension and it works properly, your foreground wools, yarns and shapes will stand forward a little of your background shapes. If you've knitted with a good tension and you've kept your two different colours in every row the same distance apart while knitting the whole row, that is to say, you've kept the background colour in the same hand and the foreground colour in the same hand if you work two-handed throughout the row, or kept them on the same finger, back whichever way. If you've had your roll coming different distances to reach your needle and from different angles, these will stand out from each other, and once that is washed and pinned out or steamed or however you wish to treat it, all this will all settle into place. And the difference, if you've never done that, the difference between an unblocked piece of Fair Isle knitting and a blocked piece of Fair Isle knitting, especially when knitted in pure wool, is quite astounding. So there we are, that's the Hinnerley jumper, a close look at both the stitches and the colour and the shapes and the patterns. And that's all for now. Hope to see you again sometime. Bye.